what if your shame could work for you instead of getting in your way? Shame is very complicated, and I am the black sheep of the black sheep of the black sheep of my family growing up a long time ago, so I learned from the beginning about all of the different levels of shame. And I've been studying it for many years. And shame is amazing. It's important to understand about it, and it can also bite you in the butt. That is not a clinical term. That is something my client told me. She came to me because she needed therapy. She was 15. And so in the first session, she was too embarrassed to speak. She looked down to one side, and I looked at her with kindness and interest, and she looked down again in the way that teenagers just have that way of, they're not going to show anything and they're just not going to let you in. I said to her, I really like your lipstick. Where do you choose that particular shade? And she's like, you do? Oh, and we were off. My curiosity about her lipstick lit a fire under her, and she started telling me that she had all these different shades, one for each day of the week, depending what class she was in, and she was using the lipstick to deal with her embarrassment and embarrassing things that boys might ask her. So in my working with her, I just said, I see how beautiful you are, and you're so clever to figure out how to use lipstick as battle paint, and we had a good laugh about that. And then I told her about the shame map, and I explained to her there's this whole thing, this invisible emotion called shame, and it would be helpful for her to understand a little bit more. So I explained to her that we balance in any moment between shame and pride. In any moment, there's this continuum, and one side can be up, and somebody can say something really positive, and that's up, and then, they say something negative, and that's up, and we're just balancing and balancing and balancing on this shame-pride continuum. It goes between yourself at best and yourself at worst. Shame is so complicated. The reason it's difficult to teach about shame is if you start talking about shame, people go right into shame. So I want everybody's agreement here. I'm going to talk about shame. I'm going to give you some clues. I'm going to give you some shame tips, even the shame map. I want to know, Girl Scouts honor, don't go into shame. We're doing research, so I'm giving you all this information about shame so that you don't have to dive into it, okay? Are you willing? You willing to not go into the shame? We're just going to talk about it. And this is called doing research, the talking about it without going into it. A lot of people come to study with me about how to work with their clients with shame. And there's 3 questions, and if you can ask even one of these questions, you can begin the conversation to see if your client has any hidden shame. These are clues for how to get at that. And the first one is, how do you handle a compliment? No kidding. I want you guys to think about that right now. How do you handle a compliment? Does it land in you? Do you kind of go, oh, thank you? Or maybe you push it away, or you hide it behind you, or maybe you turn it around and you just ignore it and compliment the person who just complimented you, and as if they'd never said it. There's many different ways to handle a compliment, and that is the first way to figure out if somebody has hidden shame. The next question number 2. Remember, we're doing research here. Just ask yourself that question. How do you handle it if you make a mistake? You make a mistake, some people might say, oh, I'm sorry, let me do that again. Or they might say nothing. And they might just look down and pretend it didn't happen. Or they might start blaming themselves and saying, oh, wow, I can't get anything right. And if they start putting themselves down when they make a mistake, maybe to stop somebody else from making fun of them or noticing that they weren't perfect or something like that. Some people hide, some people just stop talking, some people freeze up during the headlights. Some people were starting to share something and they just zip up all their feelings and they just kind of stop sharing. So they think they've done something wrong. Okay, third question is, what if somebody puts you down? In fact, what if somebody says something mean, or what if somebody criticizes you? Yeah, it happens. How do you handle it? Often, if somebody feels they're criticized or put down for something, they go into a deer in headlights reaction, or they just look down or away, or just stop, look down or look away, or feel shy, or like there's something wrong with them. So those are the 3 questions. Those questions help. I've been researching this for many, many years. And what I find out, it's not the shame, it's what happens right before the shame. So I'll ask somebody what happened before they started shouting at their kid, or what happened before they clammed up and pulled away. And so some of the clues about shame, I'm going to talk about clues that are mental, clues that are physiological in the body, and then clues that are behavioral actions that somebody might do. Remember, this is research here, so I'm going to talk about the shame, and please don't go into it. We're just learning a little bit about it. So the first thing is some clues that somebody might be going into shame. These are some thoughts, and I'm going to step over here kind of in the shame box. Okay, so in the shame box, the shame map, clues that somebody might have shame going on are basic things. They might be thinking like, something's wrong with me, nothing's right with me, I can't get it right, I am a mistake, I blew it. Remember, those are the cognitive reactions to shame. I actually had a lot of experience with that years ago when I was writing my thesis. I was having writer's block. I just was stuck and I couldn't write very much. And so I just kept thinking, there must be something wrong with me. Boy, I'm not a writer. And it just kept going round and round and round. And that inner critic was just attacking me. And it took me a long time to figure out how to do the writing for my thesis, because I actually went into a brain freeze where I couldn't think straight. And once that happened, I couldn't write. This happens to so many people, not just writers. It happens to kids. It happens to people that are just kind of like trying to get something done, and they make a little mistake or something happens. And when that inner shame happens and starts putting them down, and then the brain freeze happens and they can't think straight, it's really difficult. The way to get out of it is step out of it. Leave the shame over there, leave those negative voices over there, say that's not me, I want to write, or I want to take a break from writing, or leave me alone, that's not me. And then do something kind, like put your hand on your heart, or say, you're gonna be fine, or just take a break and come back to it, or call a friend, or whatever you need to do to stay out of that negative. voice, because that is shame. And the physiology of shame is it can freeze your nervous system. People think that they can't think, but it's just shame. Okay, I'm going to go back in it again. I'm going to talk about emotions that happen in shame. The emotions for shame might be like the face turning red, or the throat just, person can't get their words out, or the chest kind of pulls in, or the person starts to actually collapse. One of my clients had this, his throat would close, and it didn't matter if he was asking his girlfriend, when are we going to have dinner? When are we going to have sex? It didn't matter. His throat would close up, and he would just go into this inner physical collapse. And so I had to teach him how to talk to his girlfriend, that explained that he was going into shame and why he sometimes clammed up. And third thing, way to understand shame. We're going back in the shame box just for a minute. This is actions that somebody might do when they're in a state of shame. And these actions might be putting somebody down, criticizing, yelling somebody, blaming somebody, criticizing somebody, something like this. I'm going to step out of this box and look at it over there. I had a client who found himself just yelling and screaming at his son. I asked him in a therapy session, what was going on for you? I heard you yelled at your son, but I didn't understand what happened just before that. And he said, he never cleans his room. And I'm like, okay, he's a kid, but why were you yelling this time? And he's like, and he couldn't even remember. And I'm like, think back. Why were you yelling this time? And he's like, oh yeah, he asked me to go on this trip with his friends, and it was really an expensive trip, and I couldn't really afford it. So I guess I was, I guess, that's what was going on for me. And so I was able to talk to him and explain that the embarrassment and the shame of not being able to tell his son that he couldn't afford the trip for him, instead of feeling that and speaking about the shame, he went into the reaction to shame and was just yelling at the kid. So that was a clue. Shame is so important. Shame helps us understand where our boundaries are. Shame lowers the affect on anger and on emotions. It's wired in our nervous system to actually help us survive as a species. Shame has a developmental purpose. And so it's important to understand you in relation to your shame and what it's maybe trying to tell you. For the kid that I worked with who was in high school, her shame was telling her that she needed to have a boundary with some kids at school. For a couple that I was working with recently, they came to me and they said they stopped having sex 5 years ago. And he said, well, we can't figure it out. All I remember is, we were very sexual, and then she asked me, to touch her in a certain way or in certain ways, and I just felt like, well, I'll never be able to do that. What's wrong with me? And I'm like, oh, you started to feel like something was wrong with you? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what happened then? And he's like, well, I realized I was never going to be able to be good enough for her, so I just pulled away. She said, well, I didn't understand why he was pulling away, so I pulled away too. So I'm sitting there with the both of them, and I say, when you feel like you're not good enough, when you feel like there's something wrong with you, that you can't do anything right, that's actually the emotion of shame. And understanding that shame's there and being able to share it with your partner and with yourself in a kind way, you can begin to heal the shame. They manage to not stay out of the shame box, but they manage to be able to go into it, figure out, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What is shame telling me? Okay, this isn't real. This is shame. This is the emotion of shame. I'm going to step over here and I'm going to look at it. Okay, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions. Is there anything I can learn from this? Is there anything I need, or do I just kind of put it in a box or put it in a pocket or, kick it off the stage? Get rid of the shame. And be kind to yourself. So the trick of all of this is being kind to yourself, finding new ways to be in relationship with your shame. It doesn't have to be an enemy. It can actually be a friend. And so really being able to be in relation with your shame. I forgot to tell you the secret of healing shame. Shame just kind of can take our life force energy. So the way through shame is really to have love and support for yourself, putting your hand on your heart, giving yourself a hug, calling a friend. All of those things can be kind ways to counter the shame. So as you start to understand about shame, just be very kind to yourself. Very, very kind to yourself. It's an honor to talk with you about shame. The shame is over there, and I'm scrunching it down into a little ball and kicking it off the stage. So thank you for listening.